And could you also give some details about the incident on December 13th, 43?
Well, December 13th, 43 was a little more interesting than the bitch busting accident because there were Japanese bombers and fighters both involved in this. We had been flying patrol over the hump for quite some time at that time, and we had also moved from the little strip at Popeye to our new base at Nagaguli, which was close to the 10th Air Force headquarters, the hospital, Moenbury Airfield with the depot, Dinjan, and the hospital. So on this particular day, we had had an attack at Fort Hertz 2 days before, and they came up with a small force of bombers. I think there were 2 bombers and about half a dozen fighters, and they went into the Fort Hertz area. And one of the flights from the squadron I was in intercepted them, and they shot down one of the bombers and 2 of the fighters. And one of our pilots got hit pretty badly. Actually, he was the flight leader, and they hit his engine. He lost oil pressure, and he got oil all over the windshield. And the only way he could see very well was to open the canopy and stick his head up above the windshield and look out that way. So he had an interesting trip back home. He didn't make it all the way. He had to land at one of our auxiliary fields, which is pretty close by there. And he got home later. But on this particular day, I'd already been on a patrol mission that was about 3.5 hours, and we'd been flying up over the hump, and came back, landed, we're in the process of getting our airplanes reserviced. And because we were expecting enemy aircraft in the area, I told my crew chief, you be sure you get that airplane serviced just as quick as you can. And so that's what he did. He got it. I hadn't used the ammunition before because we were on patrol. So all he had to do was to service the airplane with fuel and oxygen. I had just barely got back to the alert area, and I'd laid down on the sack, going to rest a little bit while the rest of the flights came in. And we had a 20-millimeter can that we used to fire when the red alert was on. So that thing went off, and I took off running. My crew chief was sitting in the airplane filling out the forms when the alert sounded, so he started the engine up, and I come running out, and he jumped out the right side, and I jumped in the left side, and he got off the wing, and I hit the throttle and came out of the revetment area and onto the runway. They said that I was airborne in 25 seconds. I don't believe it. I think it was more like 45. But anyway, I got in the air real quick. Didn't bother to fasten up the chute or anything. So our standard procedure was that we would circle the field directly above the field and climb to 20,000 feet. And we would meet up there and maintain radio silence so any enemy aircraft in the area wouldn't know what we were doing. Well, I got to about, I guess, maybe 7,000 or 8,000 feet, and I could see way off in the distance what looked like a flight of 4 airplanes. And I was doing a circle as I spotted them. So I did another circle, and the time I came around the second time, I could see that it wasn't a flight of 4 airplanes. It was 4 flights of airplanes. So I reported this to the control center, and they said, no, we've got a good report of their location on the ground, and they're 40 miles to the east of there. And I said, well, I don't think so. I'm going to leave my rendezvous point, and I'm going to go investigate. So I did. And I went just a little ways, and I could see that it was a flight, 4 flights of bombers. So I kept going until I got up close enough that I could see that each flight consisted of 4 Japanese bombers, and they were in a finger formation, the way we usually fly like that. One flight here, one there, one there, and one there. And at that time, I hadn't seen any fighters. And I kept climbing until I got up about the same level as the bombers, and they hadn't seen me. It was real hazy that day, so the visibility was kind of poor, which I guess is the reason I hadn't seen any Japanese fighters. I looked around, and there were fighters all over the sky. So I thought, well, if it's hard for me to see them, it's hard for them to see me. So I just kind of slipped around behind and climbed up above them. And I got clear up above all the fighters and the bombers, and I followed them north. They went north of our base so they could make a 180-degree turn and come back and fly south towards home to drop their bombs. So I told the controllers that I thought this was what's going to happen. Well, when I got up to where I could see a little better, I started counting. And I made sure how many bombers there were, and there were 24 bombers. And the fighters were not flying in flights. They were flying individually and doing all kinds of silly things, aerobatics and looking this way and that, I guess. I don't know what they were doing. But I tried to count them. And I figured the only way I could count them was to take where the bombers were and divide the sky into 4 sections and count the fighters in each one of those sections. And as near as I could tell, there were 10 fighters in each section, so that meant 40 fighters and 24 bombers, which I figured is probably enough to go around since I was by myself. And so I'm sitting up there calling control and asking if they had any friendly fighters in the area, and they said no. So I kept following them until they made the 180-degree turn and headed back. And I figured the time that I thought that the Japanese bombers would be ready to drop their bombs. And I called control and said, my guess of the estimated time arrival to the bomb line is this time. And I told him what it was. So I'm sitting up there above watching all this and thinking, what am I going to do? I'm up here by myself, and that's a little bit of a heavy job to take on, but I just couldn't sit there and do nothing. So finally I decided, well, I'll try to make an attack on the bombers just before they drop their bombs and try to distract their attention a bit. So I got up in front of them a little bit. I dove down in front where they could see me, and see me quite well. Turned into them and started shooting from front quarter and attack. And then I did that to the first, to the flight, the lead flight. And I swung around off to the side and shot at the second flight on the left as I went by. Then I turned around and came back to attack the flights on the other side. I couldn't get the one except the one on the outside, so I picked that flight and came in and made an attack on the last bomber in there. And I was shooting at him, and I could see strikes on the airplane about where the left engine was. And it looked like there was something coming out of the engine, but I had quite a bit of overtake speed, so I had to go underneath. And I couldn't see what happened after that. I went into an escape maneuver, which to me was an outside roll with negative pressure on the airplane. And this is a maneuver that's very difficult for anybody to follow. They can't tell where you're going to be. So I figured the Japanese wouldn't be able to get a good shot at me if I did that. So I went into a dive. They didn't follow me very far. And I went off to one side and looked, and there was nobody behind, so I climbed on back up again. Once I got up, I figured it was not too likely I was going to be able to get closer to the bombers again, so I thought I'd take a shot at a fighter. So I got it clear up on top again, picked out the highest one, and started to run on him. But he saw me, and he turned real quick, and I couldn't get a shot at him. So I picked out the one that was in front of him, and he was kind of stupid. He just sat there, and so I went up and started shooting at him. I could see the gear drop, and he kind of rolled over and went into an inverted flight, and then spiraled off down. I followed him until he crashed in the jungle, and I came on back up again, and I made another pass at fighters going through them, taking a shot at whatever I could get. And I think I probably hit some of them, but going through real fast, you have to be more concerned about what's ahead of you than what's behind you, unless they're gaining on you. So I made a pass through there and did my escape maneuver again, came back up, and I thought, well, this has worked pretty good. I'll just try to hit the bombers again. Big mistake. So I come in and start a run on the bombers, and by this time they knew exactly what I was doing, and they saw me coming, and before I could get to the bombers, I looked, and there were Zeros coming in from my left side, Zeros coming in from the right side, and I thought it's about time to get out of here right now. So I rolled over to go into this escape maneuver again, and as I rolled over, I could see her Zero coming straight up, shooting at me. And I looked at where he was aiming, and I said, uh-oh, that's where I'm going to be. And about that time, I could hear the bullets hitting my airplane. And there was a big explosion. One bullet went through the canopy right behind my head, and it severed the fuel vent line, and it was the vapors from the fuel vent line that caused a big explosion. And I saw a fire coming around both sides of the armor plate. But I'm busy trying to get away, and the fire went out right away, so that's fine. Well, in trying to get away, I wasn't getting away fast enough, but I'm busy trying to get away, and the fire went out right away, so that's fine. Well, in trying to get away, I wasn't getting away fast enough from that Zero that was coming up shooting at me, so I wound in full nose down trim, which pushed it more nose down and made me get away a little faster. And about the time I got it wound all the way down, I got a bullet through there that cut the elevator trim cable. So I'm stuck in a P-40 with full nose down trim, a long ways from home. So I pull out of that and think, well, it's time to get on, headed on back. So I start back. The airplane is really heavy. I have to hold the stick with both hands to be able to control it. The rudder was okay, but I went a little ways, and I could see an airplane come from the other direction. I didn't know what it was, and I watched it very closely, and I'm sure he was watching me as we were going by. And once I got past, I could see it was a Zero that was probably one I'd shot at before, and he was smoking and losing altitude. And I thought, well, that looks like a pretty easy one, so I swung around to get in behind him, came screaming up behind, pressed the trigger, and no ammunition left. I had enough overtake speed that I went past him, so he just slid over and started shooting at me. But I got out of the way and I headed on back home. And after about 5 minutes, the airplane got pretty heavy and I couldn't hold it anymore with one arm, so I was holding with both hands on the stick, pressing the stick with my knees, trying to reach it with the seatbelt, which was too short. And I'm losing altitude and getting down close to the jungle. So finally I got smart and said, well, if the airplane wants to go down, all I have to do is turn it right side up and let it do what it wants to do. It'll climb. So I climbed and got quite a bit of altitude before the engine started loading up so bad that it didn't want to run anymore. So I'd flip it over right side up again, and the engine would clear up, but I'd start losing altitude again. So I don't know how many times I did this maneuver, flipping back and forth, till I got close to the base. And so finally I got close enough that I could see it. I would be able to make it to the base all right. And I'm still flying upside down. I came in from the south, and when I started letting the airplane down to where I was close to the ground, put the gear handle down, squeezed the hydraulic pump trigger. The gear went up and locked instead of down because I was upside down. And at the last minute, just before I was down to the ground, I flipped it over to where it was right side up again, put the flaps down, cut the throttle, and got it on the ground. And after that, I didn't care what happened to it. We went rolling down the runways a little way, and I was home all in one piece.
Did you see our guys almost with their cannon almost shot you down as you came into to land?
Yeah, they were watching there. We had an anti-aircraft set up on the end of the runway, on the south end of the runway from where the enemy aircraft would normally be coming. And they were watching this strange-looking airplane, and I guess with it being upside down, it didn't look like anything they'd seen before. And they almost took a shot at me, but when the wheels started coming out the top of the airplane, I guess it kind of attracted their attention, and they figured out then it was a P.R, so they didn't shoot at me.
It worked out.
So that was an interesting flight.
Well, that was a very good account.